Good day, everyone. Today, I will discuss the final homecoming of Dr. Jose Rizal in 1896, one of the most emotional and tragic moments in Philippine history. After many years of exile and travel abroad, Rizal decided to return to the Philippines even though he knew that doing so could cost him his life. Despite the danger, he bravely chose to come back to defend his name against the accusations that linked him to the Philippine Revolution. His return marked the beginning of his final days, which included an unfair trial under the Spanish colonial government. Even though the trial was widely considered unjust, Rizal remained calm and faithful, believing that everything that happened was part of God's will and that his sacrifice could inspire Filipinos in their fight for freedom. Now, to better understand Rizal's courage and the events that lead to his martyrdom, let us now look at the important moments during his final return to the Philippines. So in October 1896, Rizal returned to the Philippines for what would become his last homecoming. He knew he might face death, but he still chose to return to defend his honor and innocence. Rizal believed that his sacrifice could help awaken Filipino nationalism and the desire for freedom. While traveling back to the Philippines, he kept a diary where he documented the events of his journey and his personal thoughts. Despite being strictly guarded during the voyage, the Spanish officers treated him courteously. However, on October 8, 1896, Rizal learned that newspapers in Madrid were blaming him for the Philippine Revolution. Because of this, he believed that returning to the Philippines would allow him to confront these accusations and clear his name. In his diary, Rizal wrote that whether he would be acquitted or executed, he accepted it as God's will. Unfortunately, his trial was widely considered unfair and was often described as a mockery of justice. Many Spanish authorities and his enemies demanded his execution, even though the evidence against him was weak. Throughout the difficult time, Rizal remained calm, faithful, and ready to accept his fate. He believed that if he had to die, it would be more meaningful to die in his homeland rather than abroad. In the end, his execution turned him into a martyr and a powerful symbol of Filipino freedom.
Good day, everyone, and especially to Sir Baran. So today, I'm going to continue the story of Dr. Jose Rizal during the chapter 24. So before I share what happened, let us first imagine the situation of Dr. Jose Rizal during his voyage. He was already under close watch by the Spanish authorities because of his writings and reformist ideas. Every move he made was observed. Even something as simple and personal as writings in a diary was not free from suspicion. So during this journey, there was a particular incident that clearly showed how much the authorities feared him. Not because he carried weapons, but because he carried a pen and his thoughts. Now, let me tell you what happened when Rizal's diary was confiscated. When Rizal was traveling aboard the ship Colon, the Spanish authorities were fully aware that he had been writing regularly in his diary. As the author of Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo, he was already seen as a threat to the colonial government. Because of these, the authorities believed that even his private writings might contain ideas against Spain. What began as curiosity soon turned into deep suspicion. As a result, on October 11, Before the ship reached port said, the authorities decided to take his diary away from him. They carefully examined every page, hoping to uncover something seditious or treasonous. However, their investigation did not end there. His cabin was thoroughly searched and his luggage was inspected in detail. All his papers were confiscated and closely scrutinized. According to Rizal's own account, he was not only searched but also placed behind bars for several hours before their arrival. So, throughout the voyage, he was detained multiple times. There were instances when he was confined for long hours and released only when they were already in the high seas. Later, upon reaching Singapore, he was even placed in handcuffs. These actions clearly reflected the intense distrust and fear the authorities had towards him. Despite their thorough search and repeated detentions, nothing dangerous was found in his diary. There were no treasonous plans and no rebellious messages, only his personal reflections and records of daily events. Because the diary had been taken from him, Rizal was unable to write from October 12 to November 1. Then finally, on November 2, the authorities returned his notebook. In his entry that day, he explained the interruption and described the treatment he had endured. Overall, this incident reveals the oppressive atmosphere surrounding Rizal during his final voyage, or like final journey. Even his private thoughts were considered a threat. Yet, in the end, the confiscation proved something powerful. The Spanish authorities feared not weapons, but ideas. And despite surveillance, confinement, and humiliation, Rizal remained calm, dignified, and steadfast. As Rizal's journey continued and news of his arrest spread, concern quickly reached his friends and supporters abroad. They knew that once he arrived in the Philippines, his situation could become even more dangerous. While Rizal remained under strict guard aboard the ship, efforts were already being made outside to secure his freedom. News of his predicament reached his friends in Europe and Singapore. In particular, through two of his close associates in London, Antonio Marigidor and Sixto Lopez, acted immediately. From London, they sent urgent telegrams to an English lawyer in Singapore named Hugh Fort. Their goal was to rescue Jose Rizal from Spanish custody through legal means. When the ship Colon arrived in Singapore, Attorney Ford promptly filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus before the Singapore court. This legal action sought to question the legality of Rizal's detention and demand that the Spanish authorities justify why he was being held. If the writ had been granted, Rizal might have been released from Spanish custody. However, the attempt faced a major legal obstacle. Chief Justice Lionel Cos denied the petition. He ruled that the ship carrying Rizal was a Spanish warship. As a vessel belonging to a foreign power, it was considered outside the jurisdiction of the Singapore courts under international law. Therefore, the British authorities in Singapore had no legal authority to interfere with Spain's custody of Rizal. Because of this decision, the rescue attempt failed. What makes this event even more striking is that Rizal himself was unaware of the efforts being made to save him. At that time, he was kept behind bars and closely guarded in the ship. While his friends were fighting for his freedom through legal channels, he remained confined, not knowing that help had been sought in his behalf. This unsuccessful rescue in Singapore highlights the loyalty and courage of Rizal's friends, who took immediate action to defend him. At the same time, it shows how international laws and political boundaries prevented his release. In the end, despite the determined efforts of his supporters, Rizal remained in Spanish custody and continued his voyage towards the Philippines, a journey that would soon lead to his trial and ultimate sacrifice. That's all. Thank you so much for listening to my part, and I hope that you learned something and have a great day.
Good day everyone, I am Jamila Jean Abanico. Today, I will discuss Rizal's arrival in Manila and his preliminary investigation, which were important events leading to his trial and execution. Arrival in Manila, November 3, 1896. On November 3, 1896, the Spanish ship Colon arrived in Manila. The Spaniards and friars celebrated because the ship brought reinforcements and military supplies to suppress the Filipino Revolution. However, while the Spanish community was rejoicing, Dr. Jose Rizal was quietly transferred under heavy guard from the ship to Fort Santiago. At that time, the Spanish authorities were already determined to build a case against him. They tortured many Filipino patriots to force them to testify against Rizal. Among those tortured were Deodato Arellano, Dr. Pio Valenzuela, Jose Dizon, Domingo Franco, Timoteo Paez, Pedro Serrano Lactao. Even Rizal's own brother, Pasiano Rizal, was arrested and brutally tortured. Despite suffering severe physical pain, he refused to sign any statement that would incriminate his brother. This shows the courage and loyalty of Pasiano. Now let's move on to the preliminary investigation on November 20, 1896. On November 20, 1896, the preliminary investigation began. Rizal appeared before the judge advocate, which is Francisco Olive. The investigation lasted 5 days. During this investigation, Rizal was confronted of the charges against him. He answered all questions. However, he was not allowed to confront or question the witnesses who testified against him. This shows that the investigation was not entirely fair. The evidence presented against Rizal, there were two types of evidence presented. First is documentary evidence. These included letter linking to Rizal to the propaganda, movement in Spain, letter using his pseudonym Di Masalang, a poem called Condiman which expressed love for the country and the desire for freedom, transcripts of speeches from the Katipunan where members shouted support for Rizal, a poem titled Atalisay, encouraging students to fight for their rights. These documents were used to portray Rizal as connected to revolutionary activities. Two is we have the testimonial evidence. Several Filipinos gave oral testimonies. Many of them were tortured beforehand. This raises questions about whether their testimonies were voluntary or forced. After the investigation, after reviewing the case, Governor General Ramon Blanco forwarded the documents to the Judge Advocate General, which is Nicolas de la Peña. Peña recommended Rizal should immediately go to trial. He should remain in prison. His property should be seized worth 1 million pesos. He should be defended by an army officer instead of a civilian lawyer. These decisions showed that the authorities were already leaning forward convicting him. To conclude, Rizal's arrival in Manila marked the beginning of his final days. Instead of receiving a fair and impartial investigation, he faced a process filled with torture, questionable evidence, and limited rights to defend himself. The preliminary investigation clearly shows that the Spanish authorities were determined to prove him guilty, even before the formal trial began. And that is all my part. Thank you, and let's proceed to our next speaker.
So good day everyone. Today I'll discuss an important part of the trial of Dr. Jose Rizal, particularly about how he chose his defender and the reading of the charges against him. First, Rizal was given only one right by the Spanish authorities, and that was the right to choose his defense counsel. However, even this right was limited because he had to select his lawyer from a list provided by the Spanish army. On December 8, which was the feast day of the Immaculate Conception, Rizal was given a list of 101st and 2nd lieutenants in the Spanish army. After reviewing the list, he chose Lieutenant Luis Tavel de Andrade, who was a member of the artillery. Rizal chose him because the name was already familiar to him. It was later known that Luis Tavel de Andrade was the brother of Jose Tavel de Andrade, who had served as the Rizal's bodyguard in Calamba in 1887. Because of this connection, the lieutenant gladly accepted the responsibility to defend Rizal in court. Next, on December 11, the charges against Rizal were formally read to him in his present cell while his defense counsel was present. The Spanish authorities accused Rizal of being the main organizer and inspiration of the Filipino rebellion. They claimed that he founded organizations and wrote books and publications that encouraged people to rebel against the Spain. Despite these accusations, Rizal did not object to the authority of the court, but he clearly pleaded not guilty to the charge of rebellion. Rizal admitted that he wrote the Constitution of the Liga Filipina, but he explained that it was only a civic organization, not a revolutionary group. He also stated that since his exile to Dapitan, he had not participated in political activities. Because of this, he believed that the accusations against him were unfair. Later, the documents of Rizal's case were sent to Malacañang Palace on December 13. At that time, General Camilo Fulaveja became the new Governor General of the Philippines, replacing General Blanco. Unlike Blanco, who was known to be more human and believed that Rizal was not a traitor, Fulaveja was stricter, and this change in leadership greatly affected Rizal's fate. In conclusion, this part of the trial shows that although Rizal was given the right to choose a defender, the trial process was still controlled by the Spanish authorities, and the accusations against him were heavily influenced by political tensions during the time. So thank you, and that ends my report.
Good day everyone, my name is Aisel Dihito, and now let's talk about Rizal's manifesto to his people. The context of the manifesto. In December 1896, while imprisoned at Fort Santiago, Rizal wrote this to stop his name from being used as a war cry by the revolution. So, Rizal was in a desperate situation. While he was locked in Fort Santiago, the Katipunan, or the revolutionary group, was using his name to recruit soldiers, make it seem like he was their leader. Rizal felt painfully surprised by this. He wasn't just worried about his legal case. He felt it was a moral abuse of his reputation. He wrote this manifesto to clear his name and tell the people that he never gave this permission for a violent war. Next is the condemnation of the uprising. Rizal denounced the rebellion as absurd and savage, believing it would only lead to useless suffering and failure. So, it's important to understand that Rizal wasn't calling the Filipinos a savage, but rather the method of the uprising. He was a man of science and logic. He looked at the revolution and saw no guns, no ships, and no formal training. To him, starting a war you cannot win is absurd because it leads to useless misfortunes, meaning thousands of Filipinos dying for a cause that was doomed to fail at that time. Next is his liberty through education. He argued that the true freedom must be earned through education and industry, rather than unstable movements from below. Rizal had a very specific vision for freedom. He believed that if you give a slave a gun but don't give him an education, he will just become a new kind of tyrant once he is free. He wanted a revolution of the mind first. He argued that independence should come from above, or like through laws and education, because movements from below, which means violent moves, are unstable. He wanted Filipinos to be so educated and hardworking that Spain would have no choice but to recognize them as equals. The fourth is the suppression by the Spanish. The Spanish authorities blocked the manifesto because it only argued the revolution was premature, rather than preaching a true loyalty to Spain. This is the most interesting part. You'd think the Spanish would love a letter where Rizal tells people to stop fighting, but they suppress it. Why? It's because Rizal didn't say Spain is right. He said the revolution is premature. The Spanish realized that Rizal was still a nationalist. He was just a patient one. They feared that if the rebels read this, they would stop fighting. They would just stop and wait until they were better prepared, which was even more dangerous for Spain. Alright, so in conclusion, this manifesto shows us a side of Rizal that is often debated. Many people ask, was he a revolutionary or a pacifist? So the truth is, he was a pragmatist. He didn't oppose the revolution because he loved Spain. He opposed it because he loved Filipinos too much to watch them be slaughtered in a war they weren't prepared to win. He believed that if you give a person a gun before you give them an education, you are just replacing one tyrant with another. So the greatest irony is that by hiding this letter, the Spanish authorities actually helped keep Rizal as the national hero of the revolution, because the rebels never saw his harsh words calling their fight savage. They continued to look up to him as their ultimate inspiration. Rizal died for a revolution he tried to stop, proving that his ideas were more powerful than even he realized. And now let's move on to another topic, which is the Rizal's Sadist Christmas. So on December 25, 1896, Rizal spent his final Christmas alone and in despair within a dreary prison cell at Fort Santiago. So this section highlights the profound emotional isolation of Rizal experienced during his final days. While the rest of the world was joyously celebrating the birth of Christ and the spirit of peace and brotherhood, Rizal was confined in total solitude. As a man who has deeply devoted to his family and accustomed to spending the holidays surrounded by his loved ones and their friends. So being trapped in a dreary prison cell was incredibly painful. he was in a state of despair because he had no illusions about his fate. He spent his Christmas day brooding over what he knew was a hopeless case. So next is the letter to Lieutenant Tavel de Andrade. Facing a hopeless case, Rizal wrote an urgent letter to his defender requesting a meeting before his court hearing the following morning. The letter to his defense counsel demonstrates the high stakes and the ticking clock Rizal was facing. On Christmas Day, he received the heavy news from the investigating judge that his court hearing would take place the very next morning. So despite his internal despair, Rizal remained protective and focused on his defense. He wrote this urgent message because he had an important matter to discuss and had been waiting anxiously all morning for his lawyer to arrive. So this shows that even in his darkest hour, Rizal maintained his dignity and continued to fight for his case with a clear mind. And now I will show you the transcript of the letter. So as you read it, the actual text of the letter reveals Rizal's impeccable character and his respect for the man assigned to defend him. He acknowledged that the pressure of work likely kept Lieutenant Tavel de Andrade away, showing his understanding of nature even when his life was at risk. He was so desperate for a final consultation that he offered to meet at any time, even afternoon, evening, or even the morning of the trial. So most notably, he closed the letter by sincerely wishing his lawyer a Merry Christmas, signing off as an attentive and affectionate servant and client. It proves that Rizal never lost his manners for his humanity, even while standing on the brink of death. Alright, so in conclusion, this specific chapter of Rizal's life moves us away from his political theories and shows us his raw humanity. While he is often remembered as the fearless martyr, the Christmas of 1896 reminds us that he was also a man who felt the deep gain of being alone and separated from his family during the most merry season of the year. So that letter he wrote to his defender is a remarkable piece of history because it proves that even under the extreme pressure of an impending death sentence, Rizal did not lose his composure of his manners. He spent his final holiday not in bitterness, but in quiet preparation of his trial, showing a level of courage that was both intellectual and deeply personal. So by understanding his saddest Christmas, we gain a fuller picture of the man who sacrificed not just his life, but his last moments of the peace, or the last moment of peace for the sake of his country.
Hello, good day everyone. So since Miss Aisel was done telling you the saddest Christmas of Rizal, so it's time to proceed the trial of Rizal. But before anything else, let me introduce myself. So my name is Hazel Segovia, and today I'm going to tell you, or we're going to delve into the journey of Rizal, so especially the trials of Rizal. So the trial of Jose Rizal was one of the most significant events in the Philippine history during the Spanish and colonial period. So it showed how the Spanish authorities treated Rizal as a threat because of his writings and ideas that inspired Filipinos to seek reforms and justice. So the trial, which happened in December 1896, was conducted by a military court and is widely considered unfair because Rizal was charged with prejudice and denied proper legal rights. So, the trial of Rizal was unfair and biased. Why? Because Jose Rizal was considered unjust. The trial of Jose Rizal was considered unjust because he was tried by a Spanish military court instead of a civilian court. And the judges were Spanish military officers who had already assumed that Rizal was guilty before hearing his side. So, evidence and arguments that could prove his innocence were ignored, and he was not allowed to confront witnesses against him. So, this situation showed that the court intended to condemn him condemn him rather than deliver justice. So, the court martial began on December 26, 1896. So, the trial officially started on December 26, 1896 in Spanish court, was led by Lieutenant Colonel Jose Togores Arjona together with other Spanish military officers. So, present in the courtroom were Rizal's defense lawyer Lieutenant Luis Traviel de Andrade and the prosecutor Lieutenant Enrique de Alcocer. And among the spectators was Josephine Bracken, which was Rizal's partner that time, along with journalists and Spanish observers. And during that time, Jose Rizal remained calm during the trial. So, during the hearing, Rizal sat between two soldiers with his hands tied behind his back like a criminal. So, despite this humiliating treatment, he remained calm, dignified, and composed. He wore a formal black suit and appeared strong and confident. So, his calm behavior showed his courage and his willingness to face the consequences of his actions for the sake of his country. And the prosecution demanded the death penalty, and the prosecuting attorney, Lieutenant Enrique de Alcocer, presented the accusations against Rizal and strongly requested that the court sentence him to death. So he claimed that Rizal's writings and ideas had inspired rebellion against Spanish rule, and many Spanish spectators in the courtroom even applauded this demand, and showing the strong opposition against Rizal among the Spanish authorities. Another, Rizal defended himself with 12 arguments. So, he presented a written defense explaining why he should not be guilty of rebellion. So, first, Rizal advised against starting a revolution. So, Rizal stated that when Pio Valenzuela visited him in Dapitan, he advised him not to begin a revolution because the country was not yet ready. So, this shows that Rizal did not support violent rebellion against Spain. And second, Rizal had no communication with revolutionary groups. So, he argued that he had no correspondence or involvement with radical revolutionary organizations. So, this meant that he was not part of any secret planning or revolutionary activity. And third, revolutionaries only used his name without his permission. So, according to Jose Rizal, the revolutionaries used his name to gain support from the people, but he really did not approve of this. So, if he were truly involved, he said he could have escaped when he had the opportunity in Singapore. And fourth, Rizal would not have stayed peacefully in Dapitan if he were guilty. So, he explained that during his exile in Dapitan, he built a house, opened a small hospital, and bought land. So, these actions showed that he intended to live peacefully, not led a revolution. And the fifth, Rizal was never consulted by the revolutionaries. So, if Rizal had truly been the leader of the revolution, the revolutionaries would have consulted him for guidance. However, they never asked for his advice or approval regarding their plans. And the sixth, the La Liga Filipina was not a revolutionary organization. So, he admitted that he created that organization, but he explained that it was meant for peaceful reform and civic improvement. Its purpose was to unite Filipinos and encourage lawful reforms, not rebellion. The seventh argument of Rizal was La Liga Filipina ended after Rizal's exile. So he said that the organization did not last long because he was immediately exiled to Dapitan after its first meeting. So without him, the organization eventually stopped operating. And the eighth argument was Rizal did not know about the reorganization of the Liga. So if the organization was organized months later, Rizal said he had no knowledge of it because he was already isolated in exile in Dapitan. And the ninth was the La Liga Filipina had a different purpose from the revolutionaries. So he explained that if Liga that had truly been revolutionary, the revolutionaries would not have replaced it with the Katipunan. So this shows that the two groups had different goals. And the tenth argument was his critical letters were written during a time of family persecution. So Rizal admitted that some of his letters contained bitter words, but he explained that they were written when Spanish authorities were persecuting his family, so confiscating their property and deporting relatives. So his feelings that time were personal reactions to injustices. And the 11th was Rizal lived a peaceful and exemplary life in Dapitan. So during his exile, Rizal lived quietly as a teacher, doctor, and community leader. So even Spanish military officers and priests could testify to his good behavior and peaceful activities. And the 12th argument, or the 12th and the last argument was Rizal opposed violent revolution. So he insisted that he never encouraged armed rebellion. So even his friends knew he did not support violent movements. That is why the revolutionaries sent an emissary to Dapitan instead of Rizal being directly involved. So the 12 arguments presented by Jose Rizal were meant to prove that he did not support rebellion and that he worked for peaceful reform instead. So, however, the Spanish military court ignored these arguments and still sentenced him to death. So the last trial of Rizal was the court sentenced him to death. So despite his strong defense, the military court ignored Rizal's arguments. And after a short deliberation, the judges unanimously decided to sentence him to death. So this decision showed that the trial had been predetermined and that the Spanish authorities wanted to eliminate Rizal as a political threat. Now, after the trial of Rizal, let's proceed to the Polavija signs Rizal's execution. So, after the military court decided to sentence Jose Rizal to death, the final decision needed approval from the Spanish Governor General. The responsibility fell to Camilo de Polavija, who had the authority to confirm or reject the court's verdict. So his decision would determine the fate of Rizal and would later become a turning point in Philippine history. So the court decision was submitted to the Governor General. So after the trial on December 26, 1896, the decision of the military court was immediately sent to Governor General Camilo D. Poleveja. So before confirming the sentence, he asked the opinion of Judge Advocate General Nicolas de la Peña. So the legal officer agreed with the court's verdict and supported the death penalty. And Poleveja approved the execution order. So on the December 28, 1896 day, Governor General Camilo D. Poleveja officially approved the decision of the court-martial. He signed the order declaring that Rizal would be executed by firing squad. So this approval confirmed that the Spanish government had decided to end Rizal's life as punishment for the charges against him. And lastly, Rizal's execution was scheduled at Bagumbayan. So the order stated that Jose Rizal would be executed at 7 in the morning on December 30, 1896. So at Bagumbayan Field, so which is now known as Rizal Park in Manila. So this location later became a historical landmark and symbol of Filipino nationalism because it was where Rizal sacrificed his life for the country. And that's all for the chapter 24, and thank you for listening, everyone.